Hi, welcome to another Tech Tips with me, Colin Smith, lead instructor at the Developer Academy. Today I want to talk to you about another JavaScript fundamental, which is all about synchronous versus asynchronous calls. Within JavaScript, and this is a basic JavaScript function, it's a little bit muddled and it can take a little bit of time in order for you to get your head around how this works. Because by the very nature, everything that you might have done up until now is what we call synchronous. The code gets read and executed one line after the other, from top left to right, from top to bottom. With asynchronous calls, it's slightly different because the result of that function can happen at a different time to when the code executes. So, in other words, we can wait for a response from a server, we can have a timeout function, or we can execute something separately or even in parallel to something else that's going on. So it can be a little bit confusing at the first point, but hopefully with this little bit of a primer, you'll be able to understand the difference between synchronous and asynchronous calls. And we're going to do this through the medium of React. So let's get started. So what I've got here is a very simple React application. At the moment, it doesn't do very much. All it does at the moment is it's got a console log and get data function, and we're not using this use state at the moment. And it's got a button on the page, and when we click the get data button, we're going to get the console log get data here. So let me show you that in action. And we're going to click that, get data here. There you go. So what we want to do is I want to show you a very simple function, which is again a vanilla JavaScript function, which is called fetch. Fetch is an asynchronous function. In other words, it doesn't happen instantly. The result of this can take some time, because it's a way to actually get API data from other sites or other services into your own application. So the one that I've chosen here is the board API. So the board API just fetches an interesting thing to do with our time if we are bored. If I just kind of cut this out, I'll just show you. So what VS Code is telling us here is that we need to give it the request info, so the input. So in those words, I'm going to give it a URL of what I want to fetch. And this is not going to return us the data, it's going to return us what we call a promise. So what this is, a promise, is it's a promise to do something when it finishes, okay? So it doesn't give us it back instantly. Let me show you. So let's go const p, fetch, and then we're just going to console log p out, so we can actually examine that and see what's actually in p. So you can see that the object that's returned is a promise object and it's got a state of pending. That means that the promise is still running. At the time the console log is called, the promise is still running, it's not finished executing yet. So it's important to understand that even though we have called it here, it is not finished here. So it could be a little bit of time, it could be 10, 20, 50 milliseconds. In fact, if I just look on the networks section, you can see that actually this call took 430 milliseconds, so nearly half a second. So it takes a little bit of time to execute and complete and come back with a result. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to use this. So we've got a promise that's being fetched back. What we're going to use is another function of that promise called then. And what then does is allows us to do something when it's finished. So we know that fetch returns a promise. I'm just going to do dot then, and then takes a callback, like the response object. And I'm just going to show you what happens here. Okay, so I'm just going to call, in fact, I'm going to call console log get data here still. I'm going to call response, console log response. I'm actually going to show you what's in response here. I can get my keyboard to think more than I do. There we go. Okay, so let's see what happens now. So I'm just going to refresh the page and let's look at the console. Click the guy. So get data here still happens instantly. And then what we've got in our then function is the response object. So this is a HTTP response object. You can see some information like the cause type, URL, status 200, which means it's actually returned OK, which the status text tells us. So it has been executed. We have got a body, which is a stream. So it will need to download this in order to use it. So in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to actually get some information out of this. So I'm going to use another function here on the response object called JSON. So in other words, turn the body into JSON. This is another asynchronous function. So we will need to say, then, once it's finished, do something with the data. And in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to console log data out. I want to see what it looks like. And I'm also going to throw it at use state, which is going to be D there. Okay, when it's finished. Let's see what happens now. So you can see that we're going to get the data, then we've got a response, and then finally we get the data being retrieved. And in this case, it's an object with some properties, so like activity type, social, that kind of thing. So we've got to the point where we've actually got everything in our use state that we will need to actually run our app. So you can see in our state here, we've got that object there, and we can actually do something with it, whether it's display it or decide how to render it, that kind of thing. So that's it. That's how you would use this. Now, if you're going to actually check for errors, because sometimes there are errors, so if this API can't be reached for whatever reason, then what we would do is we would chain that then with a dot catch statement. And that dot catch statement will give us an error code, and we can then do console dot, let's do console dot error. I'm going to pass that through. Okay, so that won't show anything unless the actual API fails. Let's make it fail. Let's delete something out of this. So let's call it bore API rather than board API. That should make it fail. So if I hit this now, there we go. You can see that there's an issue. So a network error when we're fetching to bring this back. So that's great. So that works correctly as we expected. However, if we're looking at this code here, so we've got a catch, which is fine, but we probably need another catch here to deal with if the response is not exactly what we wanted as well. So if it has any problems changing it into JSON, basically. So we can, again, do another error one here, and we can do console error, and we can obviously log this in different ways. But for now, let's leave it there. Obviously, if we look at this code, it is not very readable. So what I would like to do is I'd like to make this a little bit easy to read and therefore a little bit easier to maintain going forward. Now, this way, when we're using these thens and catches, does create another issue with readability, with the sort of nested thens, nested catches, that kind of thing. I want to clear all that up. So what I'm going to show you is a different way of doing this, using another couple of keywords which are newer in JavaScript but are still accepted as vanilla JavaScript. So in this case, I'm still going to call fetch, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to get the response straight from the fetch object. Now, I said before that this would normally be a promise. If I use the keyword await, that will mean that it wants to wait for fetch to finish and then put the result into response. So again, if I just do console.log and I show you what response is, then that would be a proper HTTP response object. Now, because we're using the keyword await, we also have to make sure that getData is an asynchronous function as well. So another keyword is async, to mark this function as an asynchronous function. So in other words, this getData call here would happen and fire this off separately. So if we were to try to chain multiple functions together, this will happen, then this will get called in a separate thread to anything else that is listed after it. Let me show you how that looks. So you can see that we've got response and we've got getData here, which is great. So you can see now, this is waiting to be finished before this getData here function works. So it's a little bit easier to work it out because it is still happening one item after the other rather than setting up lots of thens. So what I want to do is I want to then get our data out. So I'm going to do response.json, just like we did before. But again, I want to await for this to finish. Then I'm going to do console.log, and I want to put in D, and I'm also want to throw it into our use state, which is there. Okay. Now let's see how that looks now. And you can see that we've got response, we've got our object, study a foreign language, which is great if you've got the time, and you've got get data here. So you can see that that is now working correctly. You can also see that our code, if I just take out these console logs, is a lot easier to understand now. We've got do this, then do this, then do this, which is great, and that works a lot better. But you might be asking, well, we had the catches before to actually catch when there's errors and things. Well, yes, we can still do that. And what I would do is rather than creating like a double catch, is I would actually use a try and catch block. So I would try to do this. And if I can't, then I want to catch it down here. Okay. So the indenting is a little bit off, but you can see what I'm trying to achieve here. There we go. Okay, so now what we've got is still got that synchronous do this, then do this, then do this, which makes more sense. And if anything goes wrong, we'll pump out an error to the console log. So let's again just get rid of that bore API. Save that. Let's have a look at how that works. There, you can see that there is an error there, and it doesn't affect the rest of our application running. And that is a very simple introduction into how asynchronous calls work and promises work, and how you can use this await and async keywords in order to make things work and actually are easier to maintain as well. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you've not subscribed yet, please subscribe. Any comments, any questions, by all means, list them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.